Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking around. We appreciate it. I know there's been a lot of panels today and a lot of speakers, but they just keep getting more and more interesting. So let's build on the previous speaker and talk a bit about the financing for different kinds of programs that we're seeing crop up all around the country. Let me briefly introduce our panelists. To my immediate left is Lacy McManus. She's the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for Greater New Orleans Inc. She coordinates between the GNO's workforce, education, environmental and resilience programs, and the realities of the local business environment in Southeast Louisiana. Prior to joining GNO, she was the Special Initiatives Manager at a nonprofit, the Center for Planning Excellence, and she sits on a number of boards locally, including that of the Jefferson Parish Chamber of Commerce. To her left is Melanie Scheet, who is Director of National Student and Employment Services at Universal Technical Institute, which has 12 campuses around the country. During her tenure, UTI has built partnerships with literally thousands of local employers who support and hire UTI graduates who are trained as transportation technicians. And to her left is Brooke Valle, the Strategy Officer for the San Diego Workforce Partnership. She oversees a variety of special projects there, from WIA Pay for Performance to immigrant and refugee services, all centered around the ideas of equity and mobility, income mobility. Prior to her arrival at the Workforce Partnership, she was a consultant with Deloitte, consulting to esteemed institutions, including our federal government, and also involved in Deloitte's Latin American operations. So thank you so much for joining us today. And so let's build a little bit on what Samira from the Atlanta Fed just shared and talk about some new and innovative ways of funding the kinds of programs that your organizations do. Maybe we can just go right down the line for starters, and then I promise we'll get more conversational after that. And so maybe you can each describe for us either your model altogether or a specific program that you want to call out and an innovative way that you're financing it.
Sure, so I'll kick us off. So at Gino Inc, as the Economic Development Alliance for the 10-parish Greater New Orleans region, our organizational budget is funded in large part by investors from the local business community. So business and industry pays into our model. We are actually an independent 501c6 organization, and we serve as the EDO for the 10 parishes, which is our equivalent of counties, in our region. So we receive a good bit of funding from philanthropy and from federal sources. That makes up about 30% of our budget. But in general, our model is that we report to business and industry in the region. That is our key audience. That is our key stakeholder group. We've taken that model and that mantra and perspective and aligned it with our workforce development efforts as well, most specifically around our program called GNOU, and that's what I'll really be speaking about today. GNOU is really very much in the model and in the line of everything we've been talking about today from a workforce development perspective. It is creating a platform for demand-driven curriculum development and program development in the Greater New Orleans region, using Gino Inc as the facilitator and the nexus between our higher ed community, our K-12 system, and then our business and industry partners and stakeholders as well. In the Greater New Orleans area, we have 12 higher education institutions. 4 of those are community colleges, the rest are 4-year schools. They're a mix of private schools, public schools, HBCUs, all in various, I would say, states of development and evolution, with various strengths, programs, et cetera. It's a very dynamic landscape. And what we started recognizing at Gino Inc was that we had an opportunity to catalyze the horsepower of these institutions and draw them in more deeply and in a more connected and effective way with our business and industry needs and concerns and the workforce challenges that we kept hearing repeatedly over and over again from those stakeholders, to really harness that power of those partners and ensure that we had a more robust workforce pipeline in our 6 industry sectors that we focus on. So spoiler alert, my keys around financing probably aren't necessarily that innovative. In fact, I would say that the secret to them is that they are dead simple. It's really looking at the programs that are existing already at our 2-year and 4-year schools and ensuring that the programs that are already there that already have funding allocated to them are more effectively aligned with what our employers actually need by having direct demand-driven exchanges between those two stakeholder groups, firstly, and then secondly, working with our employer and our industry partners to build out demand-driven programs, at those institutions that are then sponsored in some cases by those partners to varying extents, and we can talk a little bit more about that as the panel goes on.
First, let me just say it's an honor and a privilege to be here at the Talent Forward Conference and on this panel with such wonderful folks doing wonderful things, and we certainly appreciate everything that you all are doing in terms of workforce development. To talk about our financing model, it probably would help just to give a little bit of information about Universal Technical Institute. So Universal Technical Institute is the leading provider of technical training for the transportation industry. We train students in a variety of programs, including auto and diesel, as well as collision repair. So we do a lot for the industry, and we are training for positions that certainly are in high demand, and our students are able to really work and go in the workforce and use those skills very quickly. We partner with over 30 well-respected, well-known transportation manufacturers, including BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche, Ford, GM, and more. And they really help and do a lot for us. They help to equip our schools. They provide training aids and vehicles. They participate in different discussions around curriculum. They certainly hire our graduates, and at times they're helping to fund their education. And with all of that being said, there's still a huge demand, as you're all aware, for our graduates and training for the transportation industry. And as such, we've been looking at and talking about different ways to meet those needs. And most recently, we've launched a program, an initiative that we're calling Early Employment. And we're really excited about it. It's in its initial stages, and we've worked at one of our campuses to launch it, and we'll be working at another campus shortly. So our first pilot occurred at our Avondale campus, which is in Arizona. And really what we did was work with employers to bring kind of employment to the front of the student life cycle. So early employment combines proven post-secondary skill education with on-the-job training. And we have employers who are investing in students from day one, and they may be investing in before they even start school. Students are able to enroll, to request to be part of this program as soon as they enroll in school, and the employers will screen and hire them. And these employers are offering competitive starting wages, they're offering flexible hours, knowing and understanding that students are more than just students. They're often dealing and helping with families and doing other things and supporting other folks. So they understand this need, and they provide that flexible schedule for our students. So that's been fantastic. In addition, if the student does well and meets those criteria that the employer sets forth, they may be hired into a full-time position where those employers will not only provide an atmosphere where the students are immersed in a culture, but they'll also provide tuition reimbursement for the student-related expenses they incurred while they were attending school. So it's a fantastic way for our students really to understand and be part of the industry that they love from the onset of their program, and it's a great way for employers to invest in students from the very beginning and provide mentoring, on-the-job training, as well as support. And students are able to be immersed in a culture and be part of something that they truly love. In addition to early employment, some of the other things that we're working on from a creative financing standpoint would include what we would call sponsorship. So we have students who take various manufacturer-specific advanced training programs that they may have interest in. For example, again, it could be Ford, it could be Toyota, it could be Mopar, it could be GM. And what happens is we may find employers who have very specific needs, and they may need a Ford technician, they may need a Mopar technician. So they'll actually fund that part of the student's education. And beyond the funding of the program itself, they may also fund housing. So if a student who is at one of our campuses needs to take a program that's offered at another campus, they'll provide, again, as I mentioned, the housing for that. So looking at all different ways to support and meet the affordability concerns that our students have.
So I think this has just been an incredible day of dialogues, right, between the intersection of how we serve people with the education, governments, funders, and so just such a pleasure to be here as part of this panel. My organization is the Workforce Board for San Diego County, and so we are both a 501c3 and the federally designated board, which means we're charged with carrying out the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act in our community. And as we really think about our core business, we think about it as putting people into family-sustaining jobs, right? Getting them on that path into a good job is at the core of what we do, along with helping businesses grow in an inclusive way. For us, we want to see it be the double bottom line of the business's success and the individual's success as part of that organization. And so we know as a workforce board that oftentimes education, specifically credentials and skills, are key to unlocking that. And we focus on and we connect with people, particularly in this market today with such low unemployment rates, that really need a lot of supportive services. We see some 25,000 folks annually through our doors and realize that each one of them needs support to be on a path towards success. And so as we started to look at what people came into us for, we realized that education, access to education, removing that barrier of the cost of the credential was a key piece. And so we have long used our Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act and other funding. We have funding from some 44 different funding streams to help remove that barrier by paying for education for the individuals. But what we've seen over the years is many of those funding sources have trended down. And even pushing in and working closely with our community colleges, and even thinking about how could we use the funding that we had differently, we still had a gap. We see on average annually something like 2,000 to 2,500 people enroll for intensive services. Many of them are looking for access to that paid education. And when we started to look at what we actually had the financing to pay for, some years it was around 500. So you can see that huge gap of 1 in 4 where we actually had the funds. And so that caused us to say, how can we do this differently, right? How can we create a model that's not only going to address the needs that we have today of folks that need to get into the workforce, but it can also become self-sustaining so that we can address the needs of folks that are coming to us tomorrow. And so we started to look at this concept of renewable learning funds or income sharing agreements. And so in July of this year, we launched the first income share agreement fund we're aware of that's run and originated by a workforce board. Obviously, as a board, our fundamental mission isn't really the financing, it's helping get people into those good jobs. But because that was the gap, we felt the need to push in. And for us, this is really, it's a workforce program because we looked at not just what are the specific set of credentials that are needed. And for the pilot that we launched this year, we picked 4 programs that are in the tech space, although we're in an active procurement now and about to expand to others in healthcare and other fields. And so how do we couple that with all of those wraparound services that are necessary? And not just what might have traditionally been defined as a workforce wraparound services, but starting from the point of what does the person actually need to be successful, right? Is that transportation? Is it health from a mental health perspective? Is it the access to social capital and that sense of hope and really building a community? Is it transportation to get to an interview? Like, what do they actually need to be successful? And we began to structure a program that had not only high quality education that the employers said, University of California, San Diego's program we know, we love, we hire people out of. So we use those programs that were driven by market data and informed by employers, coupled with the things that we knew from doing the business of workforce to help make people successful. Giving them somebody who they're working directly with who was going to coach and consult them along the way, not just be focused on, from a compliance perspective, what needs to go into the system. And this is a transformational way to think about it, right? Our program is set up so that if the individual is making less than $40,000, they're not paying anything. The idea here is if the program hasn't fundamentally changed their lives, the risk should be borne by us as the institution. The risk should be borne by the educator. The payments to the educator are split up into multiple payments, one of which is tied to successful completion for the individual. Because instead of a model where we pay up front and pray that the individual is successful, we wanted a model that's incentivizing everyone to be aligned. We as the Workforce Board are doing the support for placement into internships and placement into jobs, so we're incentivized to get that person into a high-paying job, because ultimately if we don't, we won't have the funds coming back to support others. The institution is incentivized because if the person is not successfully completing, they're not receiving the payment. And so it really aligns the incentives around student success. And so now with the program launch, we have 75 or so students that are currently in programs. We're looking to expand into a number of other areas. And the data shows us that we should have an evergreen fund by 2025.
So many important points, especially love the idea that support for these programs isn't just about the money, that there are other things that are needed by the people involved in these programs. I want to just remind the audience that if you have a question, you can use your Crowd Compass app and get your questions in, and we'll get them on the board up here, and we'll ask them of our panelists. In the meanwhile, at Quartz at Work, which is where I'm editor, and for those of you who aren't familiar, Quartz is a digital news site covering the global economy and global culture, and Quartz at Work is its edition all about the modern workplace. We cover kind of typical topics you might expect, like management and leadership, maybe some slightly less expected ones like the lives of working parents and productivity tips and hacks. And one of my favorite areas of coverage that we do is called the purpose of companies, and it's looking at how everyone from employees themselves to mission-driven small businesses to very large corporates now are changing the way that they are thinking about their sense of purpose and their interactions with societal issues. So it was with great interest that I took a look at what the chamber here had to say just earlier this week, on Tuesday, I believe, when they talked about Project Go. And so I wanted to ask our panelists a slightly more philosophical question about reskilling and upskilling and just skilling, workforce training in general, about who really bears responsibility for the financing of it. So Chamber President Suzanne Clark said this week, and I'll quote, "Businesses have an unmatched ability and therefore a profound responsibility to shape an evolving economy. In turn," she said, "policymakers have a duty to create a framework that promotes practical and reasonable solutions." And she notes that in today's polarized environment, businesses are being called upon to do even more to address socioeconomic challenges. So I wanted to ask each of you how you would evaluate that statement and how it's playing out at your organizations or not playing out, whether business is sort of rising to the occasion and chipping in their fair share as you see it, and whether policymakers are being forward-thinking enough right now about the job market to come so that we can really tackle these issues. I just laid a lot out on you guys, but feel free to jump in.
I'm happy to start, certainly.
Thank you,
Hope that works for
Melanie.
you guys.
We said we wouldn't go in a line.
Yes. So I think from probably what we talked about, you can easily see that we agree with Ms. Clark, certainly. We think business plays a huge piece in the funding that we make available to our students and the partnerships that we had. About 2 decades ago, we changed our model and our paradigm and actually made industry customer, which was really pretty transformational and revolutionary in looking at who we were going to serve. So with industry as the customer, right, there's so much that you can do. You can understand what those needs are. You can have participation in curriculum development, participation in just the programs themselves and what's being offered to the students. And the students truly become the beneficiaries of that. And that's what's exceptional, is that they're getting exactly what they need from the industry and from what employers are telling us. So I think that shift truly aligns with what she's saying, and I think we're certainly supportive and feel it makes a lot of sense.
I would add to that I think public institutions like mine can also help to coalition of willing businesses that might be small or mid-sized and aren't necessarily able to tackle it on their own, but might have some shared challenges that gone after as a group, they can make some transformational change. I also think there is a role for the government to play in terms of some of the risk around the innovation. We do a lot of co-funding with businesses where they're paying for a portion and we're supplementing with a portion to be able to work through some of the initial risk and learning so that then the business is able to fully implement it as part of their program. And then on the government side, I would say where they can push in further is on the data front. When we think about what it really takes to serve individuals, the way that things tend to operate are in disparate, often siloed systems. So we think about workforce, and you heard about it on the panel this morning, outcomes related to serving a justice-involved population. Recidivism is a workforce. Lowering that number is a workforce outcome. Thinking about people being in stable housing or immigrants able to convert their credentials are workforce outcomes. Or thinking about childcare and how we serve people as families in a two-generational way, knowing that those kids are in high quality, affordable, matters from a workforce perspective. So I think where government can continue to lean in is how the systems can be connected and how there's interoperability and access. We want people to only have to tell their story once and be able to bring to bear the resources that they need to support them in their success.
So I would say it's more than just a responsibility. Businesses have a vested self-interest in being at the table, right? And I'm always so amazed when I sit around various meetings and various tables of very well-intentioned, passionate folks in the workforce development space who are constantly saying, oh, budgets are tight and business needs to step up. We need business to step up and we need business to chip in. There's never a conversation on how do we engage business so business can step up and business can chip in. And it always astounds me that there's this expectation out there that we're going to develop a workforce, we're going to develop a worker in a silo. In business and industry, you will gladly take what we give you because it is being presented to you. And it's just kind of astounding. It's like if somebody were to walk up to you and say, oh, I heard you needed a car. I'm going to get you a car and you're going to start paying a car note. That's not how we transact in this environment. And so why should workforce development be any different? From our position, it shouldn't be. And when you start treating business as the customer, it's not. We recently had, about 2 years ago, we had a local chocolate manufacturer approach us and say, look, we want to start an apprenticeship program around mechatronics. We've put in millions of dollars in new equipment into our plant, and we need a new skilled workforce to actually work these robots, work these machines. It's not the same labor force that we've had in the past. We know we have peers who are facing this challenge as well. We'd like to do a collective effort around this because really we only need about 2 apprentices per year. And we've talked to the community college and they say that they're down to provide the training, but not with only 2 apprentices per year. That doesn't make sense for us financially. It doesn't make sense for them. So as the EDO, through our GNOU program, we were able to go out and vet all of the other advanced manufacturers in the landscape. Admittedly, the full apprenticeship model that we were building from scratch was a bridge too far for many, but there were several who said, no, we're going to take this risk and we're going to jump on board, and having a trusted facilitator and intermediary like Gino Inc. gave them the confidence to dive in with us. And so just in August, we launched our first cohort of 9 mechatronics apprentices. We'll grow that to 20 next year and continue to scale in a repeated way. But when it comes to the finances and funding of that program, all of those companies are paying for everything for those apprentices. They've hired all of them as full-time employees with benefits. They're paying all of their educational needs. They're paying all of their school supplies. They're providing laptops. Everything that those apprentices need for the next 2 years is going to be provided by those companies because they literally built the program from scratch. They were at the table building out every component, and they're now having the workforce products that they need and they wanted that were custom built for them. So funding doesn't become a challenge when you have companies and employers at the table from the get-go and from the outset. Money is a secondary issue at that point. It's making sure that all of the players are aligned and providing the appropriate training that's meeting their needs because they know that they have the needs. They are aware of it. You don't have to convince them of it, and you're not forcing a product they don't want upon them. So it shifts the conversation entirely.
So these are really good examples of success stories or stories of things where we think we can, reasonably expect there to be success. But there's a really good question from the audience wanting to know, has there been any pushback or opposition to your finance innovation efforts within your communities? And if so, how have you addressed them? So I don't know if anyone will take a stab at that, maybe share some lessons learned.
Yeah, I can start. I can say that because financing isn't really at the heart of what a workforce board does, right? It took a lot of stakeholder education around why even move into this space. And part of that process really required thinking about how do you keep the student and sort of the protection of the student, making sure that everything that's set up is set up in the most consumer-friendly way possible at the center, and not allow the financing, the potential funder, to drive, but making sure that you've stayed core to what the mission and the why is of the program. And I think that helps people to understand that it's not a mission pivot in terms of the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish. It's a new mechanism to try to get there, and that the protection of the student stays at the center of the approach.
I would say, given that we're dealing in our GNOU model with 2-year schools and 4-year schools, on the 4-year higher ed side, there was certainly some initial pushback around, and it still is in some academic corners, frankly, around pushing our 4-year schools to become more vocational, pushing them into a community college model. There's definitely a bit of an academic ivory tower to contend with in that sense. And what we had to, and what we still continue to reiterate over and over again, is we're not trying to get you to be anything other than an academic institution. We're simply asking you to be a more market relevant academic institution. And certainly the conversation that's happening nationally and locally in the New Orleans region as well around student debt and student loans. That is, I think, a very keen reminder to uplift to our 4-year schools around the imperative that they have and the responsibility they have to their students to be market relevant, given the debt that many of these young people are incurring going to those institutions.
There's another really good audience question, which is, how do you change the narrative that it is the learner's responsibility to finance their own professional development? And Melanie, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, given the way that you guys are
Took away
modeled
the
now.
question. There's no more. Certainly, I think it starts with the industry partnership that we have. I think for sure in helping to explain and understand or share with students what that is. But I think it's incumbent upon us as well to talk about the opportunities that exist for our students in any of the settings that we have, and the opportunities to engage with them when they're interested in school or when they enroll for school. There's a lot of different things that I've already mentioned, and we do additional support through industry and the partnerships that exist. We have over 4,700 employer locations that offer tuition reimbursement packages. Those packages may be for full tuition, they may be for relocation expenses, they could be for tools, different things that they're going to use in the workforce. And I think it really falls to us to help students really understand all of the different options that exist to them. They have to hear it, they have to see it, and our industry partners have to share that as well. So they see that there's more to it, that some of the affordability concerns that they have, those things and barriers that keep them from coming to school, especially in a field that is so highly in demand and so in need, I think really is just critical at this point in time.
And I would add that for us, the conversation has been around, it's a attraction and retention mechanism for the business. It's also a way to help many of them, at least what we see in our community, who are struggling with accessing a diverse workforce. In some cases, because maybe the way that they're approaching the hiring might not be aligned. In other cases, because we're not flowing enough folks into that pipeline in the local community. And so it's even led to conversations with businesses, not about just how do you consider alternative ways to finance the package of education with all the services, but conversations with unions about, we have high-paying jobs, but transportation is a consideration. So how can we use a similar model to remove that barrier? Or conversations with organizations who serve skilled immigrant and refugees, talented workers who've come into the U.S. who need to sit for an NCLEX nursing exam, take an English class, file one legal paper, and how could that be packaged? And so it's led into conversations with employers about how can we think really differently about how this is a barrier-busting mechanism, and how an employer could, as a retention mechanism, consider paying back a portion of that individual's income share as a way to incentivize, and as a job quality mechanism for the individual, right? As a reason to want to continue to stay and engage with the organization.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I was having a conversation over breakfast with an employer on Tuesday morning talking about their retention and attraction issues. And one of the tidbits that he mentioned was, we have a $5,000 a year tuition reimbursement policy, and in the last 3 years of being in your community, no employee has ever taken us up on that. So, well, what if we flipped that? And what if we put that towards an apprenticeship model or some pre-employment training? If you already have the dollars allocated, why are we putting that on the employee on the back end? Why don't we put that on the front end and just shift that? Fortunately, this employer was very receptive to that idea, and we're moving forward now with an apprenticeship model. But part of it, too, is having those interventions with the employers to say, look, you have some tools in your toolbox. Let's just get them working a little bit better for you and for your employees.
We have about 2 minutes left, so I want to wrap up with this. Just this morning, there was some new research out from Accenture and Tech NYC. I'm from New York, so I get a lot of surveys about New York City. 85% of companies in New York City say they plan to hire tech talent in 2020, and more than half of those companies plan to increase their tech hiring by at least 20%. But I have a question for the panelists, which is all of this reskilling and upskilling and skilling really just about tech? It does seem to be the main area of focus right now. But are there, and Lacy, you gave the example of the chocolate manufacturer, although it was really a tech-based need that they had working with their new high-end whizzy equipment. Yeah, robots. So can you guys talk to us a little bit about life beyond tech?
Yeah. So for us, we started with 4 fields in tech, but just as the entry point. It's sort of a big, hairy, audacious goal, but want to get to a $25 million
That's a very
fund
tech phrase, by the way.
where we can support individuals across all of the priority sectors in San Diego, which is inclusive in my community, as I'm sure many of yours, of healthcare. Education is a huge need for us, particularly bilingual teachers, right? In the life sciences. And so while we started in tech, we're actively in a procurement now to expand to a wide variety of programs. And the idea is looking at each of those programs and saying, how do we create a package of services to result in program success, but also work with the individually? It's a very one-to-one process of getting them to what they need for individual success.
Want me to go?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, obviously, we aren't totally tech, but there's certainly a tech component in everything that our students learn. Certainly the cars are more complex than they've ever been. The code is more complex than the Apollo's spaceship. So there's definitely tech component to it. But we certainly support, we've just launched programs related to CNC and welding. So really, I think anything related to skilled trades and skilled professions will be critical to look at in the same manner.
Yeah, and for us in the greater New Orleans area, oil and gas is certainly the foundational industry sector of our region and continues to be a massive employer and big player. And that's the craft trades and skills, which typically have a strong tradition and foundation of apprenticeship and employer-based education. So certainly continuing down that trajectory is something we're consistently focused on as well as healthcare, and then obviously, yes, tech.
Great. Well, thank you to my terrific panelists. I really appreciate it, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you for moderating. Thank you.